What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Nightblade tank. So over the iterations of the past few patches, Nightblade tanks have actually been getting a fairly good amount of additional buffs to their overall tanking utility. They have a source of minor vulnerability, for example, and their bow proc does give them a little bit of additional damage mitigation now. So Nightblade tanks are actually in a fairly decent spot now, at the very least compared to where they used to be 4 or 5 patches ago. They've actually become quite popular for groups that are progressing through Sunspire as a main tank there, and in other trials they actually do kind of stand their own against other tanks in a certain sense here. There is some limitations to running a Nightblade tank, mainly the fact that your burst heal is not going to be quite as bursty as a DK's burst heal. However, the utility that she provides through other sort of sources, as well as your overall increased tankiness, does sort of make up for that a little bit there. You also don't have an engulfing flames, so again, some drawbacks for running a Nightblade tank, but overall they're in a much better position now than they ever have been in sort of a tanking environment. So just like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over gear, skills, attributes, basically everything you need to know to basically recreate this build yourself. This is a support build, which means we will be going over a lot of different sets, a lot of different skills in order to kind of flesh out your full potential as well as adapt to certain situations. So don't take things that you hear or see in this video as granted. You will need to be very, very flexible. For those guys who watch my videos and streams, you do know that I raid with Mayflower, and we tend to do things a little bit unconventionally sometimes. So always keep your mind open as a support role. The most important thing is obviously, and we'll discuss this towards the end of the video, to kind of learn the fights, learn the mechanics of the fights, and once you kind of get an understanding of the fight, you can adapt your build to kind of fit the nature of the fight. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start here first with our gear. So we're going to start off first with Monster Helm sets, and we're going to go through all different Monster Helm sets that I would recommend you pick up. Starting off here first with Symphony of Blades. This comes from the depths of Malator dungeon, so you do need to have access to the Wrathstone DLC to grab this set here. It's a very powerful set when it comes to overall sustain. The downside is you will need to run some form of like a group heal abilities. Refreshing Path is a good example of this, or Energy Orb, in order to get the proc off, because it does proc off of heals. In terms of raw resource sustain, it's actually a very decent set here. And so definitely a set that I recommend you pick up as a support role. Moving on from there though, there are a handful of other Monster Helm sets that you should pick up, just have it available for you. Starting off here first with, let's see which one's first. Swarm Mother is a pretty decent set to grab here. This is mainly going to be useful in fights where you have a lot of adds to chain in. Nightblades do not have a native chaining ability. They must use Silver Leash under the Fighter's Guild line, which does use stamina. Stamina is a very important resource for tanks because you do use it to block. And so Swarm Mother kind of counteracts that a little bit. So you do give up your Monster Helm set, but it does pull in enemies that are further than 8 meters away from you, as long as you block the attack. So general rule of thumb is, if you're using Swarm Mother, the taunt of things you want to chain in, block them, and then they'll be able to be chained in once you get to this position you want to chain them into. So if you block a little bit early, then you will end up pulling them in, so you kind of got to be a little bit mindful of when you decide to block if you're using Swarm Mother. From there, Earthgore is a set that you might want to consider having on hand. It's not going to be absolutely essential, and it has a very niche use. It's a really strong burst heal, however it only heals one person within the area, so it's going to be most useful in the situations where you're going to want a burst heal and you don't need it very, very often, so that this only procs every 3 to 5 seconds. A good example of this would be using this in a Cloud Rest progression if you are one of the tanks that goes into the Portal Realm. It'll only ever proc when you're under 50% health, and so it will always proc when it is needed. It's not going to just proc endlessly or needlessly. So pretty nice set in those niche scenarios. Moving on from there, we have Lord Warden, which is a nice set to have. It's a pretty generic set. It fills both a selfish role as well as a more support-oriented role as well. It comes from Imperial City Prison, so you will need to have access to Imperial City DLC to grab this set. It adds just flat out resistances across the board, both to you and up to basically everybody within 8 meters of you. It gives 3870, which does stack on top of your typical resistance buff, so Major Ward, Major Resolve, things like that. So overall a very good boost to your group survivability, especially for melee DPS who tend to be within that 8 meter radius. Moving on from there, we have Bloodspawn, which is going to be used for the ultimate generation. This is probably one of the only Monster Helm sets you can run as a base game player. All the other Monster Helm sets so far we've covered are part of some sort of DLC expansion. So you're going to be wearing this for the ultimate, not so much for the resistance buff. So the kind of goal behind this is to generate ultimate very, very quickly, something that Nightblade tanks are actually pretty good at doing, in order to get more Warhorn uptime. So that'll just give you greater major force uptime, which overall boosts your DPS. Next, we have Thurvokun. So this creates a growing pool of bile when you take damage, which the bile deals a little bit of disease damage, but it also deals minor maim and minor defile. So really great source of AoE minor maim, which Nightblade tanks indeed do have a source of AoE minor maim, but it's not very consistent. So Thurvokun kind of fills in that gap there. Next, we have Vycosa. So when you bash an enemy you've taunted, you frighten them with a deafening howl, applying major maim to them for 3 seconds. Major maim is a very strong damage debuff on the boss. The only other source of major maim is going to be coming from ultimate abilities. So this basically gives you an on-demand major maim for every 15 seconds for 3 seconds. So if you're able to anticipate high damage situations, a good example would be in Sunspire, the Dragon Breaths, or if you're doing like Asylum Hard Mode, the Fires in Execute would be a pretty good example of this, or any of the side bosses' special mechanics, such as Corroding Bolt from St. Lothus. So really nice as long as you're able to anticipate the damage, and it comes every 15 seconds or more. So really nice set to have on hand. The next 2 sets are going to be more selfishly oriented, Stonekeeper and Grundwolf. So Stonekeeper comes from Frostvault, Grundwolf comes from Runegrave Fane. The Stonekeeper, when you block an attack, you gain an energy charge stack, every 1 stack per second. When you gain 6 charges, you release the energy, restoring 350 stamina, magicka, and health. Then you cannot regain new charges for 14 seconds, essentially giving this a 20-second cooldown. So pretty nice self-sustained set here, with the stamina, magicka, and health. So really strong set. I've used it a couple of times, and the resource return is absolutely phenomenal if you're able to get hit at least once every second. If you're getting hit for less than that, it's not going to be quite as strong. Then Grundwolf, when you deal critical damage, you restore 1000 magicka or stamina, and then 500 of the secondary resource. Not quite as strong as Stonekeeper, and does require you to deal critical damage. As a tank, your critical damage rating is going to be on the low end of things, but it is a nice potential option there if you don't want to get Stonekeeper. The Stonekeeper is going to be the stronger set here compared to these 2 sets. Next, moving on to our 2 sets. So as a tank, you'll be wearing 2 different sets, a body set and then a front bar / back bar set. So the set that you're wearing as basically as a weapon set. Generally speaking, heavy sets will be the ones that you'll be wearing on the body, and any sort of medium or light armor sets, which there are a few, they will typically be jewelry and weapons, because obviously you don't necessarily want to be a light armor or a medium armor tank. Not impossible to tank as a light armor tank or a medium armor tank, but it does make things a lot more difficult. So generally speaking, you wear heavy armor as your body. So for our heavy armor set, we have Perfected Yolnahkriin here. This comes from Sunspire on Veteran, hard mode or non-hard mode. This currently is the only source of minor courage in the game. So overall, a pretty nice buff. Minor courage equates to about 2 to 2.5% increase in damage done, and it is on a taunt, so pretty much only a tank is able to wear this set. You also gain some minor Aegis. Really nice damage mitigation bonus there. Not very large because you have a lot of mitigation already, but still something is better than nothing. Plus you get stamina and health, 2 very important resources for a tank. So generally speaking, Yolnahkriin is a set that you're definitely going to want to have on hand if you have access to the Sunspire trial. For our front bar set, this is Alkosh, Roar of Alkosh, which comes from the Maw of Lakaz trial, which is part of the Thieves Guild DLC. This is a medium armor set, so you will need to wear the jewelry and the weapons like I have here. Alkosh is a very strong debuff set. It still remains, to this day, the strongest debuff set in the game that a support role can wear. So whenever you activate a synergy, you deal a certain amount of damage, as well as reduce the physical and spell resistance of any enemy hit by this shockwave by 3010 for 10 seconds. This is a very powerful debuff and usually equates to roughly 6.5 to 7% increase in overall damage at a bare minimum. So a very powerful set here, and because tanks are typically going to be in the best position to hit what you want, which is normally the boss and adds, Alkosh remains a very, very powerful tanking set here. Now in terms of traits and enchants here, there are basically a couple of schools of thoughts. The first school of thought that I personally prescribe to for traits is going to be Infused on your large pieces, and Sturdy on our small pieces, as well as our shield. Other tanks like to run all Sturdy. If you would like to do that, you certainly can. You do get a little bit more sustain through blocking if you go Sturdy on all of your pieces here. And then for enchants, I like to go Prismatics on my large at the very least, and then healthy or stamina or magic depending on kind of how I want to balance out my stats on my small pieces. Some people just go straight up all Prismatic enchants, which is still a very possible option here. Just going to be a lot more expensive to do that. In terms of jewelry enchants and traits, I am personally a fan of keeping one Harmony here for the additional resource return that you would get from orbs or shards. Pretty nice to have on hand, but you don't need to run Harmony at all. Triune is going to be a very safe bet here. It's probably the safest and most generic, which is sort of trait to run, which basically acts as a prismatic enchant. You can also go with just healthy, arcane, or robust, depending on which of the max resources you want to get the most out of. You can also go with infused, which is also a very generic sort of trait here that basically buffs up your enchant potency. In terms of enchants, we have the shield play enchant here, which reduces the cost of block. You can also run a Magicka regen enchant, which gives you, as you can name surmises, Magicka regen. There's also some argument to be made for potion cooldown glyphs if you're an Argonian, but generally speaking, those are very niche and not particularly useful overall. But you could potentially run potion cooldown glyphs to reduce the time between drinking tri-potions. That just helps your overall sustain. But it is expensive to maintain sort of this sort of potion burning, so to speak. Your shield is still going to be Prismatic enchant, and then for your weapon, your front bar weapon, you can basically run any enchant you'd like. As a one-handed weapon, you will have half the advertised amount on the glyph, so really your enchant's not going to be very strong to begin with. In terms of traits, you have a few options. Decisive is one potential option. You can also run Charge if you like with a shock damage enchant. That way you can help up with off-balance uptime, concussed uptime. If you want, you can run Infused even, but very similarly to enchants, traits on a one-handed weapon are half the strength as they are in a two-handed weapon. So overall, you're kind of trying to make the best out of a bad situation. I like Decisive personally, but there's arguments to be made for pretty much any trait in the game. For your backbar, you basically have 3 weapon options, arguably 4. You have Sword and Shield, obviously. You can go just double sword and board. Also can go Ice Staff if you want to get additional block mitigation from the Destro Staff passives. It also allows you to use Magicka to block. Not many people like to do that, but some people like to have that flexibility there. The other option is going to be the Lightning Staff. The Lightning Staff just helps with off-balance uptime through Lightning Blockade. The fourth option, which is not going to be very common, is going to be a Bow, and that's mainly for those tanks that also do a little bit of off DPS. The Endless Hail or Arrow Barrage does end up proccing enchants, but mostly it's for the damage that the Bow does, because the Bow abilities are going to be a little bit more damaging. For all these options though, you're going to want to try to get a Crusher enchant, especially with a two-handed weapon, so any of the staves or the bow. Try to do an Infused Crusher enchant if you can. You can also go with a shock damage enchant to help with concussed uptime and off-balance uptime, or weakening to help reduce the damage that's incoming to the group. So again, kind of play to your kind of group strength, what your raid lead wants. In terms of other sets to hold on to, I'm going to start off with some dungeon sets first. Starting off with heavy dungeon sets. You have Ebon Armory, which is a classic tanking set here, which comes from Crypt of Hearts. This is a base game set. It just increases the max health of pretty much all of your group members, up to 12 people, you and 11 other people, by 1,000. This is before any modifiers, so this actually ends up being closer to about 1,300 to 1,400, depending on specific modifiers. So things like CP bonuses, minor toughness, things like that. So it's actually a pretty nice buff. Gives your DPS a little bit more survivability so they can focus more on doing damage rather than trying to stay alive. Moving on from there. Not many other dungeon sets. There's Leeching Plates from Imperial City Prison, which is nice for ad pulls when you want to try to stay alive. And then you also have Jail's Tenacity, which is a more selfish set. So when you lose 7,000 or more health from a single attack, you gain Major Vitality for 5 seconds. Not going to be very useful in all fights. Just try to make sure that if you are going to be using this set, you will be losing that 7,000 more health in a single attack. It can't kind of be like a channeled. So if it's like a tick attack and you don't lose 7,000 or more health in a single tick, it will not go off. So good examples of when you would use Jail's Tenacity would be for Cloud Rest to kind of help combat Baneful Mark. Sunspire is also one potential place to use Jail's Tenacity as well. And you have Dragon's Defilement, which comes from Lair of Marsalok. Whenever you take damage from melee attack, you basically have create an aura around you that applies Minor Fracture and Minor Breach, which is really nice. The only other consistent source of Minor Fracture and Minor Breach would be from a Stamina Templar's Power of Light, which is a little bit tricky to apply in an AoE situation. Dragon's Defilement does apply AoE, so this is really nice for trash pulls. You basically have this sort of AoE Power of the Light going on here as a armor set, so really nice set to have on hand. In In terms of overland sets, there are a handful of overland sets that you're going to want to hold on to here. Starting from the top of the list here and working our way down, Plague Doctor is the quintessential selfish tank set. Just adds a flat 3000 max health before any sort of modifiers. So really great if you're just starting to learn mechanics of the fight, want some more survivability, but once you learn the mechanics of the fight and are comfortable with tanking, you should shy away from Plague Doctor. From there, you have Akaviri Dragonguard, which reduces the cost of your ultimates by 15%, giving a little bit better major force uptime. Not going to be quite as strong as other support sets, but still a potential option to have on hand. Next we have Livewire, which just helps out with concussion uptime in AoE fights, so trash fights. Those are the 3 overland sets I would recommend picking up. And then in terms of heavy sets, trial sets I should say, not too many. There actually aren't many heavy trial sets that are particularly good outside of Yolnahkriin. The rest are kind of not all that great. Now in terms of light and medium armor sets, there are a handful that I would recommend picking up. So under the light armor sets, I would recommend picking up at the very least Worm's Raiment from Walls of Madness for the additional magic cost reduction. Weapons and Jewelry, because it is light armor set. Under the medium armor sets, we already talked about Alkosh, which is the medium armor trial set. In terms of dungeon sets, there is one set that I'd recommend picking up, and that's going to be Hircine's Veneer, if I can find it. Hircine's Veneer here for the cost reduction to stamina. Now for Worm and Hircine, again, you want to get jewelry and weapons. It's going to really depend on your group composition. If you're running all stamina DPS, there's no reason to run Worm. If you're running all magic DPS, there's no reason to run Hircine's. Some groups are going to be sort of this mixture of both, so some groups, some raids like to have both of them in their sort of support roles. So you might need to wear one of these sets in order to kind of facilitate the various sets that you're going to have on hand across the various different support roles. From there, there are other sets that you can get at your own leisure. So for example, Martial Knowledge is a light armor set, overland set there, potentially good for tanks. And then Powerful Assault is another potentially good set to hold on to, which comes from a Telvar, trading in Telvar stones, so you can buy it off of guild traders. So those are 2 other sets that you might want to consider picking up, Martial Knowledge and Powerful Assaults. Powerful Assaults just add some weapon damage when you use an assault ability, so you will need to use Vigor in order to get the bonus from Powerful Assault. But Powerful Assault bonus does stack with Minor Courage and Major Courage, so it's a pretty strong set overall. Martial Knowledge does require you to be below 50% stamina, so it does require some very good micromanagement of your stamina resource in order to make use of it. Moving on to our character sheet. For this build, I am an Imperial. Imperials are going to be one of the better racial options when it comes to tanking. Racial choice for tanks is not going to be as important as it is for things like DPS or healing. Mainly because a lot of the success as a tank comes from knowing the mechanics, knowing how to react to mechanics, and just generally being an overall good sort of conductor of the fight, so to speak. And in that regard, race doesn't really contribute all too much to this. But there are some races that are obviously better suited for tanking than others. Imperials is obviously one of them. You get max health and max stamina, 2000 of both. Plus you get a little bit of additional resources back, and you get 3% cost reduction across the board across all abilities. So pretty nice bonus to sustain as well as max resources. Other racial options include Nords, which get some additional ultimate whenever they take damage. They get some additional physical and spell resistance, plus they get some health and stamina. Argonians are a decent option as well. With 8% additional healing done, they get max health and max magicka as well. So not as much stamina, but those other 2 races are fairly solid options. For those of you guys who watch my streams and check out my kind of recorded VODs, you do know that I tank on a Dark Elf, which don't get any sort of bonuses to max health, but we do get max magicka and max stamina. Because of the nature of tanking in ESO, having resource pools across the board is very important. So again, races doesn't really matter all too much in terms of tanking. For attributes, this is really going to depend on your racial bonuses as well as the armor bonuses that you're wearing. So as an Imperial, I have additional health and I have additional stamina. So I don't need to put as many points into health and stamina here. I can shift some points out of those and put them into magicka. As a Dark Elf, I can tell you from experience, I do need to put a lot more points into health in order to get up to a healthy level appropriate for vet trials. Generally speaking, the rule of thumb is to try to hit 35k max health or higher, and then try to get as close as you can to 20k max magicka and 20k max stamina for across all of your different sort of armor setups here. So that's kind of the general rule of thumb that I would recommend you shoot for as a tank. Moving on from there, you don't want the Shadow Mundus. I forgot to change Mundus here. You want to run the Atronach Mundus instead for the additional Magicka regen. A lot of our buffing moves, a lot of our utility moves do use Magicka, so you just want to make sure to have enough Magicka to kind of use all of them. So Magicka regen is pretty important for that, to kind of maintain good levels of Magicka. And then in terms of health, or I should say food, we are using purple food. So this is Tri-Stat food, which increases all 3 resources. There is a food coming out under the Witches Festival this year, which is going to be a slightly better version of the Tri-Stat food. But until that comes out, we are stuck with purple Tri-Stat food instead. Now in terms of ability bars, starting off with our front bar here, this is just one of many potential combinations. We have Pierce Armor, Heroic Slash, Dark Cloak, Merciless Resolve, Lotus Fan, Incapacitating Strike. On our back bar, we have Inner Rage, Balance, Mirage, Elemental Blockade, Leeching Strikes, and Aggressive Warhorn. A lot of these abilities have very useful sort of tools here. So, for example, Dark Cloak you definitely want to have. This is your burst heal. This is basically your self heal here. This does heal over time, so you kind of need to want to use this before you anticipate the biggest hit. You don't have a burst heal, so to speak, like a Dragon Knight or Warden does. You have a heal over time. So this, in total, over the 8 seconds, will heal you for about, in this case, a little over 16,000 health, closer to about 17,000 health, 17.6k health. So it is a very strong heal. It just takes quite a while in order to get that heal going. So for kind of high intensity fights, you don't want to discuss this with your healer. You know, you don't expect me to suddenly burst up from 40 to 100 like a DK would be able to. Merciless Resolve here, this or the other morph will give you the 10% additional mitigation once you have all 5 stacks going and you don't use the bow. The bow itself here doesn't do that much damage, but if you decide to fire it off, you do get a little bit of a burst heal. You're typically speaking we will not be shooting the bow at all. You typically just be activating this, getting your 10% mitigation, and then just sort of forgetting about it. You don't need to renew this once you get the 10% mitigation. As long as you don't leave combat, you will keep having that 10% additional mitigation. Lotus Fan is the source of minor vulnerability, so with this you don't need to run Infallible Aether on your healer or DPS if you're one of the groups that do that. So this is a really strong tool. This basically Nightblades are the only one that can provide minor vulnerability on command, so really nice tool to have here. You can also go with Ambush if you like, which is the other morph Teleport Strike, but Lotus Fan is going to be a little bit better because we do want to conserve stamina for blocking. Incapacitating Strike is here for the Reeve passive, which gives you 100 Magicka and Stamina when you deal damage with a light or heavy attack on an enemy with a negative effect on them. And taunts do count, so you will always get that Magicka and Stamina back whenever you light attack. Slide attack weaving on a Nightblade tank is pretty important in order to get that Reeve passive going. You can of course replace this with any other sort of ability as well. So some other abilities you can replace here. Mirage is on our back bar here, and this is a source of major evasion, minor ward, and minor resolve, as well as a so this is a pretty nice, I keep forgetting this is an assassination, not shadow ability. This is a pretty nice bonus overall. A major evasion is actually very nice as in terms of damage reduction. Not all damage is going to come from the AoE effects, but there are many that do. So having Mirage here is pretty nice for damage mitigation. Under the shadow line, you have Refreshing Path, which is basically a small heal. It's about 1k heal every second. But if you're wearing something like Symphony Blades and you need something to heal, Refreshing Path is a pretty good group heal. Next we have Manifestation of Terror. This is a fear move. So this basically is going to be your version of Talons, DK Talons. Fear, now instead of driving people away, makes them cower in place. So this, I like the Manifestation of Terror because you can place it ahead of time. Basically, you see a group of ads up ahead, you can place it there, they will cower, and then everybody can kind of run in there. This also does place another one next to you as well, so you can just use it sort of to kind of chain things in with Silver Leash, and then you can use Manifestation of Terror to frighten them. Darkshade is the source of minor maim. It does have an AoE minor maim, but it's not very consistent, so again, if you want to run AoE minor maim, Thurvokun is going to be the better option here. Under the siphoning line, Debilitate is a good source of minor Magicka steal. Then you have Power Extraction for the damage reduction from the weapon damage reduction here. And you have Healthy Offering, which acts as sort of another heal over time that you can apply to somebody else. Not particularly great because it does cost health and it doesn't heal quite as much as it would on like a Nightblade healer, but it is one potential option. So under the Shadow and Siphoning, you do have two ultimates that are going to be pretty useful overall. Bolstering Darkness provides a major protection as well as a nice heal over time if you activate a synergy, so pretty nice ultimate to have on hand. And then Soul Siphon is good for an additional healing ultimate as well. Also gives you major vitality, so it does increase the overall healing that is done. Under the weapon line, you could run Ransack if you'd like, but you have a source of minor protection already through Dark Cloak, so not really needed here on a Nightblade tank. Defensive stance is pretty nice if you need to fight anything with projectiles. It will reflect one projectile, so overall pretty nice to have on hand. Under the Destro Staff line, I do recommend trying to get Crushing Shock here as a ranged interrupt, which is always always useful to have on hand. I try to combine nice and useful together. It's always useful to have on hand here. If you're running the bow back bar, you're going to want to run something like Endless Hail to help proc enchants, as well as obviously to do some damage. And at the armor line, Unstoppable is actually a pretty decent option to run here. You get the Major Ward, Major Resolve. I would typically be running Immovable. So basically, with Immovable, every piece of heavy armor, you increase the amount of damage you can block by 5%. So with 7 pieces of heavy armor, you get 35% additional block mitigation, but you also will be unable to move. Your movement speed reduction would be 100%, so you don't be able to move with dodge rolling. That's kind of the downside of running Immovable, but it does help out a little bit. You do be able to anticipate, at the very least, heavy damage. You can run Immovable and reduce the damage even further when you block it. Under the Fighter Skilled line, Silver Leash is going to be the only way you can pull enemies in. There's no other chain ability on the Nightblade skill line, so make sure to learn this ability. Next is going to be Ring of Preservation for the minor protection to everybody, as well as the small heal that it provides. Major skills, you run Balance for the 1 magical sustain, as well as the Major Ward and Major Resolve bonus that you get. Under the Centric Order line, you can run Introspection or Deep Thoughts for the health, magic, and stamina return. If you want to use something like, for example, Immovable as your source of Major Ward, Major Resolve, or you want to use some other source of Major Ward, Major Resolve, then Deep Thoughts and Introspection would be your best way to restore resources overall. Under the Undaunted line, make sure to have all these unlocked. Overflowing Altar for the Blood Feast synergy, as well as the Minor Lifesteal. Shadow Silk for the damage synergy. While it has been nerfed, it's still a pretty strong synergy. Bone Surge for the Spinal Surge synergy, which gives major vitality as well as a damage shield. Mostly going to be used for the major vitality bonus. Then Energy Orb for the resource return from Healing Combustion, as well as the small heal as well. Helps out to proc Symphony of Blades. Under the Alliance War line, you want to have Echoing Vigor here, kind of as a group heal, as well as if you're running Powerful Assault. Under support line, you can run Reviving Barrier as another kind of defensive ultimate, and you also have Efficient Purge in order to purge any negative effects that you have on you. Moving on to a champion point, CP cap is 810, hasn't moved at all, so we still get 270 CPs across each of our different constellation types here. I do believe I do need to shift my CP points around here for you guys. So, I like to try to get at least 64 in Arcana. You can go up to 75 or 100. But you're going to want to focus in more on Shadow Ward. So you're going to want to pump Shadow Ward up to at the very least 66, 61, somewhere around there. 72 would be the next sort of jump point there. And then from there, you can do something like, it really depends on how you kind of want to play around with this. So for example, like you can go like 40-40, Tumbling Warlord, and then you can put the remainder 11 to Sprinter, for example. Green CPs are fairly flexible if you'd like. You can even take the 11 from Sprinter, for example, and put it at the Arcana up to 75 here. So a lot of different variations here that you could potentially run. For your blue CPs, there are basically 3 nodes that you need to get up. So you want to get Precise Strikes up to 81, you want to get Elfborn up to 81, and you want to get Blessed up to 100. The remaining 8 can go really wherever you'd like. Now the reason why you want 81 to Precise Strike is to help out with any sort of stamina heals that you have. There are a handful of abilities that also scale off of whichever is higher, your stamina / weapon damage or your magicka and magicka damage. I don't believe Nightblades have access to many of them, maybe 1 or 2, but it's always nice to have the option to know that you have some additional healing strength with critical heals if you have Precise Strikes. Finally, our red CPs, I have 81 Ironclad, 61 Thickskin, and 64 in both Hardy and Elemental Defender. This is going to be a more balanced approach to things. This will give you really good mitigation across pretty much all pieces of content, but it's not necessarily going to maximize mitigation across any singular piece of content here. So that's pretty much all the build information, so let's talk about tanking in general. Now, I typically do not play Nightblade tank. I actually don't even have a Nightblade tank on the live server. I do know a few Nightblade tanks though, and I have talked to them a little bit about their tanking style and what they prioritize, and how it's different from Dragon Knight tanking. For example, the raid lead from Mayflower plays a Nightblade tank on occasion, and he had a DK tank that he also played, so he has an experience on both of them. One of the big things that he mentioned to me was the fact that maintaining buffs is going to be a little bit trickier on a Nightblade, because you have several of them, depending on obviously how many you're trying to keep track of. The bow mitigation is pretty easy. You just activate the once at the start of combat, and you just sort of forget about it. But ambush / Lotus Fan is, gotta kind of make sure to keep track of that. So that's every 8 seconds or so. The other thing that he made note of is the lack of an overall burst heal. So again, your self heal is going to be coming from something like Refreshing Path or Dark Cloak, both of which is a heal over time effect. So you're not going to get immediate burst healing off unless you are running some other sort of ability here. So you're a little bit more reliant on your healers to kind of make sure that you're topped off before any sort of big hit. The good thing is you do have an extra mitigation, so you're not going to get hit quite as hard as, for example, a Dragon Knight. But you just is something to keep in mind here. It is sort of a difference here between Nightblade and DKs. That lack of burst heal does mean it's really going to be, you kind of have to know the fight before you approach it from a Nightblade tanking level, or you need to be very familiar and very comfortable with a Nightblade tanking sort of what they do and how they differ from DK tanks. But beyond that, the normal rules of tanking still apply. So there's 3 goals in tanking: stay alive, keep the enemy taunted, and then manage buffs and debuffs. The first 2 are obviously going to be the most important, because that's what defines the tank. If you're down, you're obviously not a good tank. If you're not taunting your bosses or any enemies, then obviously you're not a good tank. So once you learn those, feel free to use selfish sets. Let your raid group know that, hey, I'm learning to fight, just please bear with me. Once you learn to fight though, it is very important to lurk towards the 3rd goal, which is managing buff and debuff uptime. So again, like what the raid lead said from Mayflower, managing buffs and debuffs is very important and a little bit more involved with Nightblade compared to DK, where you only really have Engulfing Flames for 12 seconds. You have things like Lotus Fan to maintain, Mirage if you're using that, as well as Dark Cloak. You want to try to maintain that for the minor protection as well. So you have a little bit more involvement going on here. And then Lotus Fan and Ambush, a little bit tricky because technically while you're teleporting you can't be blocking, so you kind of want to make sure to time it in a way that when you land, and that split second between landing and getting your block up, you're not going to get hit by anything. So managing buff debuffs is going to be a little bit trickier on a Nightblade compared to a DK, just because due to the fact that you have a little bit more to manage. But that's kind of the best that I can do, describe a Nightblade tank without actually having played a Nightblade tank. I do recommend trying to look for tanking sort of experts on Twitch or on YouTube. Some of us do play Nightblade tanks. I personally do not, but there are a few that do have Nightblade tanks on hand, because Nightblade tanks are, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, very popular main tanks for Sunspire, and a lot of the higher end guilds are progressing through Sunspire. So I'm sure there is a streamer out there that does stream Nightblade tank videos. But in general, if you want general kind of overall generic tanking advice, please feel free to leave a comment below. If you guys have questions about the build, again, kind of leave them out in the comment section below. General tanking things on a DK tank, you can just check out my channel for any sort of previous videos looking at other various trials. A lot of Sunspire and a lot of Cloud Rest, but there are, if you dig deeper into the archives, there are some other trials in there, so you guys can get a sense of what a tank does in certain trials. But again, any questions about the build or tanking in general, you can just ask them here, and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.